ultimate step-by-step blueprint for building bigger arms.
Only bench cable curls with extra bicep stretch and resistance in the stretch to doing half your bicep training as bench cable. By extending the shoulder behind us, we get a deeper stretch on the bicep muscles. 3 studies have looked at preacher versus incline curls. Studies suggest that the brachialis and brachioradialis actually make up about half of the elbow flexor muscle volume.
If you want to get bigger arms, there's a better way to look at arm training. I used to consume information like this when I was first getting started out 15 years ago. Technical, detail, science-based people on YouTube telling you need to understand the anatomy and you need to do all these different exercises. This one for the stretch, this one for the contraction, this one for the bottom of your bicep, this one for the top. And this is the key information that's going to lead to more growth for you. I, as a beginner, was really into that. And I absorbed all that information and I believed it. Okay? So I don't blame you, and it's not a horrible place to start. But through my own experience of many years experimenting with different things, I realized it's not the most important information, and it largely misrepresents what you actually need to do to get the best results. As you get more advanced, you will realize that the main thing that leads to additional muscle mass on your arms is going to be your ability to progress the weight and reps. This is going to lead to the majority of your growth. Not all of it, but it will be the primary driver of additional muscle tissue gained. This is what I experienced starting out in a place, hyperfixating on all these tiny little details, thinking that it's going to be what leads to growth, staying consistent, pushing myself, eventually starting to realize it's all overkill. It doesn't really matter. The bicep is going to get trained when you flex your elbow. The tricep is going to get trained when you straighten your elbow or extend your elbow. And it's really as simple as that. Pick a handful of movements that are going to work for you and focus on progressing them.
My go-to progression for arms is simple. Double progression on the first set. First, add reps week to week until you hit the top of your target range. Then bump the weight up and start the cycle again.
I've never seen progressive overload to look like this. Okay, this is a complete misrepresentation of what it's actually going to look like in practice. Gaining 2 reps each week, 3 weeks in a row, and then on the 4th week gaining 3 reps is utterly it's like this is not what it looks like ever unless you're an absolute newbie and you're capitalizing on newbie gains. Your body's going to adapt to going from not training at all to training consistently. You might see a rapid rate of progress that could look something like this, probably still not this rate, or you're blasting massive amounts of gear. Outside of those 2 scenarios, for most lifters, you're not going to see this rate of progress or anything like this, and it makes me skeptical as to whether Dr. Wolf is actually consistently doing progressive overload, because anybody who's in the trenches knows that gaining 1 rep a week is really good progress, and that's not sustainable week after week after week after month after year. So to start out at 5 reps, and if you're actually training to failure or close, and you pick a weight that the most you can get is 5 reps or 6 reps if you leave 1 rep in reserve, and then the next week to do 7 reps with that same weight, and then the next week to do 9 reps with that same weight, and then the final week to bump that all the way up to 12 will never happen. Also, the 5 to 12 rep range, doing 5 reps to failure or close for your arms is just going to destroy your elbows. It's really not worth it. Any type of triceps extension with a weight where you're going to do 5 reps and hit failure, the risk to reward just does not make sense. And I've done it myself, and I've hurt my elbows doing it. Doesn't mean that's going to happen to everyone, but there's no reason you can't see the same amount of muscle growth if you just do 8 to 15 reps, which I think is a rep range that makes way more sense. The overall structure of picking a weight where you're going to get like 8 or 9 reps hitting failure and track that, and then the next workout try to get more reps, and the next workout try to get more reps, and keep chipping away at it until you can get 15 reps or 12 reps or whatever the upper limit of your rep range is, and then increase the weight and repeat the process. But in practicality, the rate of progress suggested is comically unrealistic. It makes me question whether or not you're actually in the trenches, because anybody who is knows that you're just chipping away day after day, and you add a rep once a week maybe, and that's if you added a rep once a week 4 weeks in a row, so in a month you added 4 reps to a lift, that's a tremendous amount of progress and definitely going to lead to muscle gain. But this example, to add 7 reps in a month, and this is sort of the standard of what you should focus on as an example for lifters to follow, is like insanely unrepresentative of the actual process. And the fact that nobody's commenting about it, and the individual who has a PhD and is a doctor who knows everything is recommending this, I think points to this, my main gripe with some of the hyper detailed analytical science stuff, that in theory, these are good ideas, but in practice, does it actually lead to a better result, or does it actually make sense? And this is just a glaring example that you're kind of outing yourself, showing that, okay, like you clearly don't train consistently to failure or close and track your workouts and have a good idea of what that progress or what that process looks like over time, because it never looks like this. So
most people also take too much rest between sets for arm training. We recently analyzed all studies on the topic of rest times for muscle building and found that 1 to 2 minutes of rest maximized growth. I rest around 60 to 90 seconds between sets, just long enough to catch my breath, shake out some fatigue, and hit the next set hard without wasting time.
The last point I will touch on is his recommendation on rest times. Again, having experimented with low rest times, as little as like 10 seconds, all the way up to 7 minutes, over many, many years, I found that the longer rest time, about 3 to 5 minutes, led to way better results than the 60 to 90 second rest time. And the reason I believe that is because progressive overload, again, is going to be the primary driver of your growth. And so your ability to push the maximum weight for the maximum amount of reps that you can do at your current strength level more times throughout a workout is going to lead to a more productive workout. Meaning, if you start with the 60-pound barbell and you do curls and the maximum amount you can hit is 12, on 13 you fail, and you rest 60 seconds, the next set, how many are you getting? Not 13, not 12, maybe 11, maybe 10. That's 2 sets. On the third set, you're maybe getting 8 or 9. If you're doing 4 sets, by the 4th set, you're getting maybe 6 or 7 reps. Okay? Conversely, if instead you slotted in a 3-minute rest time, the first set you get 12, the second set you get 11, the third set you get 10, the fourth set you get 9, something like that. The total amount of weight that you moved is much higher because you spread it out over more time. That's why I believe the longer rest time actually produces more muscle growth, because it is a better support or structure for encouraging progressive overload. Because once you push to failure and you don't let that muscle even come close to full recovery, now we're just pumping the muscle, getting lactic acid buildup, getting more of a burn. But are we actually focusing on moving more weight for more reps? Not really. And a lot of people will then complain that that's too long of a rest time. To combat that issue and keep your workouts efficient, I think the superset structure is the way to do that. And I like that he's suggesting this as a way to train and make your workouts more efficient. If you start with a bicep exercise and you do a few warm-up sets and then you push to failure in the 8 to 15 rep range, whatever number you got, 13 reps with your curls, and then you rest 3 minutes, which in reality, people dick around and sit on their phones anyways. Just take 3 minutes to chill, get ready, do your triceps, okay? And then push to failure with your, behind the head dumbbell extensions, my favorite move. You get 11 reps with the 40-pound dumbbell, whatever. And then you rest another 3 minutes. And then by the time you come back to biceps, you've had 3 minutes of rest after the first set of biceps. And then you did your set of triceps, which takes 30 seconds. And then you do another 3 minutes of rest. So you've had 3 minutes plus 30 seconds plus 3 minutes. You've had 6.5 minutes of rest for the bicep muscle individually. So that next set, you're going to get close to your maximum output again, which, again, in my experience, having done straight sets, having done supersets, having done really long rest times, having done really short rest times, applying these different ideas in practice, I consistently noticed that the superset structure, paired with the longer rest times, allows you to recover more and allows you to push more weight for more reps and subsequently build more muscle. Again, this is just my personal experience. I am a sample of n equals 1. I'm not saying that I know more than all these studies and all these studies are wrong, but I also think that a lot of this information is really good if you're just starting out, okay? And you just need something to go off of, and you need some concept or idea of understanding it, even if it's overcomplicating it and making you fixate on details that don't matter. At least you're motivated and you have some concept of training and you're in the gym. That's how I was, okay? The first couple of years, doesn't really matter. As long as you're in there training consistently, you will see some form of progress. But in my case, having been in that position and fully bought into, I need to get my bicep fully contracted by getting my elbow up here and then twisting behind my body, and then I'm going to get it fully stretched. I'm going to do 6 different exercises for my biceps, and this is what's going to lead to growth. And, getting up to 15, 16-inch arms and then kind of plateauing, which is probably something similar to Mr. Dr. Wolf here, that's a good way to look at it. In my experience, then I said, okay, well, I'm not growing anymore, and we're still fixating on these little techniques that don't seem to be driving more growth, and I want more growth. I'm just going to start experimenting, okay? And I don't have elite level genetics. Now, I started out with friggin' 12-inch arms or something like that. It took me several years to get them up to 16 inches, and then I was stuck in that range for a long time. Then I got injured. I took some time off. I came back, 15.5-inch arms over the last 5 years, built them up to almost 19 inches, and the things I've found are through my own practical experimentation, okay? And at the end of the day, I'm just sharing that with you guys as another thing to consider, because I think theoretically, although it is also useful, and you should absorb any of this science and information that gets put out and think, does that make sense? I'm going to try it, and then over time assess, does that actually line up with what I'm seeing in the gym? For some of it, yes. For some of it, no. And then using experimentation, that's how I was able to continue to produce more growth. And through that, I found things like using a longer rest time to lead to more growth, focusing solely on progressive overload and not worrying about all these complex exercise variations and the need to isolate the biceps in 4 different ways. Just throw that in the trash. It literally seems to never lead to a difference. I'm just going to pick a few bicep movements and a few tricep movements that work for me, and I'm going to focus on training with really high intensity and ramping up the weight. I'm going to start to train a little bit more often as my body adapts, working up to hitting the arms twice, maybe even 3 times a week. I'm going to scale my volume up, so I'm doing 10, 20, 30 working sets-ish for each muscle each week. And then something that wasn't talked about in this video that I've found to be very productive, although it sounds kind of gimmicky, but trust me, is tempo. Using a slower tempo, using a faster tempo. If you use a faster, more explosive tempo, you will produce greater strength gains, a faster rate of progressive overload, and subsequently more muscle gain. This is what I saw. And again, I was listening to the science. Slow, eccentric, slow, eccentric. I was doing that. And I was stuck in a plateau for multiple years. Arms stuck at 17 inches at this point. Doing slow eccentrics, just burning the muscle out. Not growing. A year plus. No additional gains. Stumbled into using a slightly faster explosive tempo. What happened? Immediately started getting stronger. Immediately busted out of the plateau and started to see growth. Okay, am I going to stay fixated because science is telling me I have to do a slow eccentric to see more growth? Or am I going to just base some of it off of my personal experience and go, I did that for a year. I haven't grown any more at this point. And as soon as I started using a faster explosive tempo, not changing any other variables, I immediately started getting stronger. It allowed me to move more weight for more reps, a little more aggression, a little more oomph. And now I'm measuring my arms, they're getting bigger again. I'm seeing more growth. Okay, this could be a useful thing for you to try in the gym based off of a gym bro's practical experience who's open to the science and applies the science, but also I'm open to the feedback that my body gives me in the gym based on the different things that I'm willing to try. So using a faster explosive tempo at the beginning of your workouts for the sets where you're the most fresh and you're tracking the weight and the reps that you're doing, I think will massively help you to drive more strength and drive more growth. Then as the workout progresses, you can transition to do a little bit lighter weight, slower, more controlled tempo. Emphasize the stretch, emphasize the lengthening part of the motion, emphasize the contracted part of the motion, work on perfect form. And also towards the end of the workout, you can shorten up the rest times, use things like drop sets and intensity techniques to burn the muscle out and get a sweet freaking pump, because that's fun. Whether or not that's going to be the main driver of hypertrophy, I don't really think so. I think you can go into the workout and get the craziest pump of all time and, wake up the next day and have the same size muscles. But there's probably some little benefit to it, and if nothing else, it's a fun way to finish your workout using intensity techniques like drop sets, which he also mentions, which are useful. That is a rough summary of what I've seen up to this point in my experience. And the takeaway that I want you guys to consider is that in today's world, we have an overload of information and knowing how to do things. And that seems to be enough for a lot of people. And I'm here to encourage you to shift a little. Absorbing information is great. Talking about being the expert about something is great, but what results do you have, okay? And for Mr. Dr. Wolf himself, 15, 16-inch arms, decently impressive, but maybe there's stuff that you haven't done. And if you looked at me and said, okay, your arms at almost 19 inches are not my standard, and I want to get 21-inch arms, or I'm going to only listen to the person who has that, I say, hell yeah, brother, I love it. Like, hear what I have to say, but at the end of the day, your rejection of my ideas and thoughts is because my results aren't good enough. I love it. That's great, and that's going to motivate me to train even harder. And if you want to go listen to somebody who has better results and has achieved the thing that you want, then all the power to you, man. Because at the end of the day, I don't think working out is that complex. And yes, genetics will always play a role. And some people have elite level genetics and maybe don't know as much about training and maybe have slightly less effective training methods, and they're compensating for that by just having elite level genetics or blasting massive amounts of PEDs or some combination of the two. I'm not ignoring that is a factor, and that some people who have less impressive results have studied more, have experienced more, and actually do have better information. That is an element, but I think we also need to honor that at the end of the day, the results do matter, okay? And if you have phenomenal level results, that person probably has experienced and walked down a path to learn things that you wouldn't get from a textbook or a study. And if you don't have phenomenal level results, but you know all the information, in theory, you're probably missing some aspect of it. Doesn't mean that there isn't valuable points to what you're saying, but you're probably missing some practical aspects because you haven't actually walked the path to achieve those additional results. And at the end of the day, it depends on what you're looking for and who you want to consume information from, but I'm just adding that as something for you to consider along your journey to ultimately allow you to absorb the widest breadth of information, digest it, and think independently and critically for yourself, and then apply the information to your workouts while also stepping back to assess what happens. And if you're just getting started and you're new to the gym, it can seem very overwhelming, right? And it's like, how do I figure it out? Gym bros say this, science guys say this. There's so many people making content trying to get me to buy their programs. Like, what the hell do I do? Just cut through the fat, man. Just train consistently, always show up. 99% of people don't do that. Train with really high intensity. If you don't train to failure, you got to train close, okay? You got to bring some gusto and push hard, all right? And then progress your training, whether that be the weights and the reps, pushing for progressive overload, which is going to lead to most of the growth, or increasing the frequency, increasing the volume, changing the rest time, moving some of these parameters around, experimenting with a few different exercises, tweaking things to make your training more difficult and more demanding so that it stimulates more growth over time. You can really kind of distill everything back down to that, and I don't think we need 35 studies breaking down the anatomy of the arms and the different exercises in order to go in there and see some growth, okay? But the reality is it's just hard. The message I'm giving you is that the habits behind walking the path and actually getting the results are way harder than sitting and watching a video where we talk about all the details and this is in theory the best way to do something, and now you're armed with that information. It feels great, and I'm here telling you that that's maybe not the most useful thing for you and you don't want to hear it. If that's the case, no worries. And I was finished with just reminding you that I genuinely used to be this person. I used to be that guy. For probably the first 2 to 3 years plus of my lifting career, I was obsessed with watching YouTube videos like this and consuming information like this that was overly technical and overcomplicating the process. And I believed that it was the best information for me. And only through experience and a desire to continue to grow did I start to realize that it was a slight misrepresentation. It was slightly overcomplicating things. And a lot of these simple factors that I've touched on in this video actually lead to more growth. That's only through my own experiences, not because I'm predisposed to be some idiot meathead gym bro who just wants to ego lift and doesn't even want to look at a study. I've looked at the studies, I've consumed that. I used to be there, and I still to this day will watch a video like this. The reason I clicked on it is like, maybe he has something interesting that I could learn from him. Maybe there's something in here that I haven't heard of before that I could apply to see more growth. Being results biased, meaning I prioritizing getting results more than subscribing to a tribe or a certain ideology of training or a certain way of thinking. And at the end of the day, I let the own results that my body produces dictate my conclusions and thoughts, and I don't assume that everybody is going to respond exactly the same way that I do and that I know everything at all. But I think it's a useful perspective to add to this world that is dominated by science-driven outcomes, an overcomplication of a practice, training for muscle gain that is inherently quite simple. And I think a lot of people are feeling lost and misled and fixating on little details that aren't actually leading to results. At the end of the day, it's hard-ass work. That's why most people don't do it. And you got to put more and more into it and test yourself and really show up over and over again and train to the absolute limit. Okay, so that's my rant. I hope that in the end of the day that helps you to make some more arm gains. And I've living and breathing this world of training for arm growth for the last 15 years of my life, minus 2 or 3 years with an injury in the middle there. But I'm very passionate about it, and I want to share what my experience has been, and hopefully at the end of the day it helps you guys to go make some gains as well. So thanks for listening to the Ramble Fest, and we'll catch you in the next one. Peace.